we didn't think it was in the cards. I mean, you don't know what people will make of a film that's effectively silent, and it's like an art house film that found this sort of meteoric life, and it's thrilling, and it's a conceit that has so much room for expansion, and it seemed like quite a natural progression to see the next chapter.
For people to think that it was cool was so unbelievably emotional and beautiful, and it's not only the success of the film, which is great. I think it's the fact that people connected to what we connected to. Certainly, and Emily and I, did this movie as a metaphor for parenthood, and the fact that people picked up on all that stuff, the fact that people loved all the detail of the first one, and all the elements of survival and this idea of family was just really overwhelming. The truth is, I had no intention of doing a sequel. I don't think anyone thought that there would be a sequel. This was never designed to be a franchise, and yet I think that the power of the world is the thing that makes it so possible to delve into it again. What I mean by that is I think most sequels have a hero or a villain, and you have to build the world around them. And we have the benefit of having the opposite be true. We have this world built and ready to play in, so you can drop whatever hero and villain you want into that world, and that's what's really exciting about it. The metaphor of the first one was parenthood. If you extend that metaphor, could I play with that metaphor longer? And I think there's an evolution, an innate evolution in the metaphor that really became powerful in my mind. What I mean by that is, if the first one was about the promise you make as parents to your kids, that as long as you're with me, I can keep you safe and everything's gonna be fine. That's a promise that every parent makes to their child, and sadly has to be inevitably broken at some point in that relationship. And so I thought, when that promise is broken, that's growing up. And so when you let your kids go out into the world on their own, that's what growing up's all about. And so that's what the metaphor of the second one became, the idea of these kids and this family dealing with loss. Dealing with their safety net being taken from them. We definitely get to experience much more than we did in the first one, but my goal, again, in order to respect the audience, was I didn't want to just do a movie that was bigger and flashier. I wanted to do a movie that the story and the characters dictated everything. So when you leave the path, yes, we're going into the unknown, yes, we're leaving the farm, but we're leaving the farm because the family has to leave the farm. So we're expanding the world, but the intimacy comes from the rules are still the same. One of my favorite things about the first movie was this dichotomy of surviving versus thriving, that my character was really content with just surviving, that there needed to be no flourish in life. It just was about putting your kids to bed and making sure that they're safe. And the mother's character, Evelyn, that wasn't enough, that you couldn't just survive in a world. You had to thrive. You had to let these kids live a full life. And I think that the real fun part for me writing was playing with that dichotomy again in the second one, that basically her idea of thriving may have put her husband in dire danger and sort of been one of the reasons that killed him. So I think that she's sort of investigating that theory and reinvestigating it, and she sort of becomes the protector and the survivalist, and certainly doesn't want to lose anyone else in her family. The beauty of Cillian's character, and what I was so excited when I wrote the character, was he hasn't made a decision on how he wants to live his life, that there is so much fear in his life, so much loss in his life. He doesn't feel the need to be a part of any community. And yet when meeting this family, it's a real conundrum for him, because this family is, of course, something that you want to be a part of, you want to help in any way you can. That is a very nuanced thing to have to play. This sort of inner struggle is very difficult to play as an actor. You usually choose one or the other. Cillian Murphy is without a doubt one of the best actors, if not the best actor I've worked with, other than my wife. And the kids. The kids are amazing too. But there was something about Cillian, I had never seen that level of professionalism. I had never seen that level of preparation. His talent is, he's so good at all times. She faces probably the most intense challenges because she's completely on her own. she, you know, even though she has the answer and her hearing aid is a weapon, she still can't hear. So she's in a more constant danger even than the rest of her family. She's a little girl alone in the world, which is, you know, was just such a really nice thing to show that this sort of, what I always loved about Millie's character is that she always had this innate sense of being a warrior princess. And what you get to see in this movie is that warrior princess thing comes at a cost, because at the end of the day, you will still see her as a little girl, and she's alone, and she doesn't have anyone to help her. I don't see them as having thought or intelligence and thinking things through. I think it's more about overpopulation, and it's become that they are strongly outnumbering us, and so it's one of those things where, again, I think it keeps the simplicity of the rules really strong. I've been a fan of Djimon's forever. I mean, going back to Gladiator and Amistad and all these movies, but the movie that really blew me away of Djimon's that I never forgot, and the reason why I cast him, was In America. And I think that role, to me, there is something that about Djimon that is so innately emotional. You immediately watch any performance of his and you have a little bit of a choke in your throat. You're ready to cry with him because he's such an open, emotional person. Now that we know that the audience is accepting of this world and accepting of these rules and loving the way the rules play out in the world, we basically answer the question that the audience asked of themselves, which is, what would you do? Because I think that the family in the first movie has a leg up on the rest of the audience, because they can speak sign language, they have all these systems created, and now none of those things are gonna save them. So they become just like everyone else, which is every single step that they take is a potential tragedy. And I think that that's what's really exciting, is that in the first movie there was a system that would keep you safe. In this movie, nothing keeps you safe. So the second movie really is, you know, the rules of the first movie without a safety net. Anything can be your demise. You know, it's a corny line, but if you like the first one, I think you'll hopefully love the second one, because the first one is just a small slice of what's possible in this world, and then the second one, we're going to show you what's happening in the rest of the world. So it's everything you loved about the first one, but there's more to experience. Obviously, because they don't have the safety systems, every step that they take is much more treacherous. The result of making sound here is a lot worse, because there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide to. So it's a lot more exhilarating.
I know we didn't anticipate this sort of meteoric life the first one took, and we didn't think it was in the cards. I mean, you don't know what people will make of a film that's effectively silent, and it's like an art house film that found this sort of meteoric life, and it's thrilling, and it's a conceit that has so much room for expansion, and it seemed like quite a natural progression to see the next chapter. I think that broken promise is a really harrowing experience for the kids, but ultimately I think it's a very powerful message that we see generationally. What happens within this family is that the kids forge ahead, is that the kids have to grow up, they have to take charge. And also with EVELYN's character, with my character EVELYN, she is now a single parent, newborn baby, house is destroyed, 2 other children to protect, and she's out there, she's exposed, and she's grief-stricken. And so it's a really intensely emotional state that she's in, and the world is very daunting suddenly. I just think for me, I found this one emotionally just a more intense experience, because there isn't any respite from the agony of what they've gone through. There's not one moment where it's pleasant for them. It's just urgent, and it is like a runaway train, this film. And I think if the first film was almost like, how do you avoid getting cut? I feel like the essence of this film is, oh my God, how do we stop the bleeding? You know, it just doesn't stop. And so I feel probably one of the most intense experiences I've had doing some of those scenes. Well, that's the great challenge, is once you step off the path, you know, what awaits you, and how do you maintain those rules? The rules are the same, it's just that now the rules are highly challenged by the environment that they're in. The great unknown represents the rules being challenged in every way. EMMET has lost everything. and has suffered because of it, and he has been hardened by this environment, and so there's an ambiguous quality to him when you meet him. She's very much following in Lee's footsteps, wanting to do as he would do. She's as, you know, as sort of determined and technically savvy and fearless as he was. And so I think she feels it is honoring him in some ways if she uses this newfound power to kill them. She can use it for good. She can use it to help people. She doesn't know what's out there, though. She doesn't know what's happened to the human race. All she knows is what she sees in her family. I think he needed to be more behind the camera for this one because the scope gets bigger. Visually, it's more ambitious. It's like he had huge ideas for how he wanted to shoot it and how he saw it. So just to have him behind the camera for the nuance of orchestrating that whole thing was huge. Like, I think we all wanted that and needed that. I think they'll really love seeing the new challenges and new environments that these well-loved characters find themselves in. I think they are faced with adversity that is sort of jaw-dropping at times, and I think visually there are set pieces and action in this that just blew my hair back. I just think it's incredible, and it's all under that tense conceit of if you make noise, you die. And so the room for possibility is just endless.
Well, I saw it in the cinema with my two sons when it came out, and had read very little about it. I knew very little about the setup or, you know, about the creatures or anything, and it absolutely knocked me out. And the thing that I loved about it was that it knocked me out emotionally. You know, because it ticks all the boxes of a, you know, a horror kind of thriller thing. But for me, the thing was family. You know, it felt to me like actually a film about family. And I remember being in the cinema with my two boys, and they were sort of watching like this, and all the people in the cinema like weren't able to eat their popcorn. You know, it had that incredible effect. It wasn't a passive viewing experience, you know, it was quite the opposite. That's the power of the premise, and I guess the power of the writing, and everything is conveyed perfectly without that much dialogue, with very little dialogue. And it actually, it tends to focus you on the jeopardy, the danger, you know, because they are having to communicate by sign language or by, you know, just by their eyes and all. It was such an original take in it. It was brilliant. After I saw the movie, I was so blown away by it that I gotta write to John Krasinski, and just, because I didn't know him or Emily, I'd never worked with either of them before. I was like a fan of their work, but I'd never seen them or met them personally. So, so I wrote this email just to John to say how much I enjoyed the film and how brilliant it was, and congratulating him on it. And then I chickened out, and I never sent it. I was like, don't do that. You don't need to be doing that. He's a busy man. He doesn't need to hear from some actor. And then like a year or so later, he called me up, and he was like, look, we're doing the second one. Would you be interested? And I said, man, I was gonna send you an email. So it was a lovely sort of serendipity, or like, I don't know, simpatico or something, that he was thinking of me for that part. Well, I think because the first movie was so sort of intimate, and it's pretty much like one location for the most part, and it's a very, very clever way of setting up a world which was set up, but we only got to see glimpses of what had happened sort of outside of their tiny little existence. And I think in this movie he just goes slightly wider, and you can see it slightly from a wider perspective what has happened in the world. It's still a very, 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 very small part of what has happened, and I think that is a clever way to approach a story, because you can keep moving back each time and show a bit more, and it poses a lot of questions without answering them, which I think is very clever. I've always loved working with writer-directors, first of all, because you know exactly, you can go straight to the source of where the story has come from, you know, and that's the case with John. And then you add on to that the fact that he's an actor as well, so he completely understands how actors work. His notes are amazing and concise and to the point. His enthusiasm for the whole process of making a film, because he is involved in at so many different levels, is infectious, you know. So you're on set and you just feel, you have this, he's got this incredible childlike excitement and enthusiasm about the process of making films, and yeah, that's catching. People who liked the first movie, and millions of people did, is the fact of just going like, okay, now we're giving you a glimpse at a bit more of this world, you know, and you see what you know, see how it affected more people just outside of this sort of nuclear family, and we're just pulling back a little bit. And I think that's very, very exciting to glimpse, because again, you start putting yourself into their shoes. So I think that's what will be most exciting, and it still has all the sort of thrills and spills and scares that the first one had, you know.
The first time working with Cillian, and obviously he's a very, very intense, you know, actor and a wonderful human being. But of course, you know, I mean, this is the kind of the type of actors you want to, you know, journey the story with, you know, because the intensity in their face kind of tells the story of what you know, where you're at and what you're dealing with, and the drama, the level of drama. It's pretty amazing. It's wonderful to work with an actor who's very much an actor, and also who is a director, and the affinity, as you know, as opposed to simply a director who've never been, you know, on the other side of the camera. And so his approach, obviously, is an approach of caring and, you know, of actors. And so his demeanor in directing is very, very organic.
The first time I really knew that it kind of was going to go crazy was when we were at South by Southwest, and we were sat in the cinema, and it was just, the whole movie was like, the crowd was dead silent, just silent. And I was kind of going, oh, this is kind of, maybe they're not liking it, maybe it's not going well. And then at the end, when it finished, like, everyone just started applauding, and the whole room suddenly filled with this applause, and it was just so overwhelming and incredible. It hits Marcus in a way that, that he realizes what's happened and what's gone on, and it's almost because so much goes on, the barn burns down, and all of that crazy stuff happens, and then they're kind of on the run, trying to survive, trying to find a new home, and all of that is happening, and it kind of, they don't have time to sit down and dwell on the fact that their dad's gone. They have to survive. They have to get out there and push all emotions aside and survive. Cillian's just great, such a phenomenal actor, but just a great person, and constantly cracking jokes, but also really focused and professional. I've already built these relationships with these actors and John, and so that really helps, because then you get on set and there's no small talk, and there's no kind of like, you get into it, and you just play around. Like, I feel safe to talk to John about how I feel safe to play around with the scenes, to play around with Emily, to play around with Millie. And even Cillian felt right at home when he came in, and we just started talking immediately. And just to be able to learn and play and risk and do all of these things is why I do this job, and so this movie is really, I've learned a lot from both of these experiences, just being on set with these phenomenal actors and actresses. Just to work with him again was a dream, because he's just such a, he knows exactly what he wants, and he's very articulate with how he says what he wants, but he's also very open to your ideas, and also he's very, he's a bit of a dad. He's a bit like, he's always looking out for me and Millie. He's always like, are you okay? You okay? Did you get hurt? With all our stunts that we're doing, he's very, very protective. I think, honestly, because you've already had the first one, people are going to go in already with the kind of excitement left off from the first one, and they're going to just come out with even more excitement for what's to come.
John always said it was a love letter to his kids, which is a very odd thing to say about a movie like that, but in the sense that it's all about parenthood and protecting your kids and feeling like you can kind of create this bubble around them in a way, and if they just stay close enough, you actually have the ability to do that. I think the second film is sort of a graduation of that idea, in the sense that our family is forced to move on from this safe haven that they've created, from this home that they have, and when they step out into the world, both literally and figuratively, that's exactly what they're doing. And with Dad gone now, he's sort of passed the torch in some way to his daughter and to the whole family, but particularly to Regan, who I think takes on that responsibility. And if the first one was sort of about protecting your family, then the second one is about the hope and sort of future that lies in the hands of the children. I think the fun of this movie is putting them out in the world and saying, how are you going to not only survive and stay quiet, because what the slate that wasn't wiped clean is the rules of the movie. So they have to kind of live by the same rules that they did before. They just don't have the safety net that they had before. So now to go out in the world with a baby in a box, and along the way to have all different kinds of injuries and to survive all these different things, I think it raises the stakes in every single way, because the same rules apply, except now it's a free-for-all. They don't know the terrain. They don't know who they're going to run into. They don't know what they're going to come up against. So it just makes it that much more terrifying. Regan slowly is sort of becoming her father and taking on that role in much the same way she started to in the first movie. And so I think she's this incredibly resilient character who, as much as she I think struggles with the guilt and with everything that's happened in the past, now I think realizes that she has an opportunity. She literally is the future, so she has the opportunity to go out there and do on a much larger scale what Lee Abbott did for the family in a smaller way. The decision to pick up right after where we left off, I think, was twofold. One, I think creatively it was the most exciting direction when John came up with the idea. I also think that it's much more challenging, or I think it can be much more challenging to say, okay, if we're literally making this part 2, it's the chapter of a larger story and we're picking up right where we left off, as opposed to saying all this happened off camera over the course of the last 2 years and now we're picking up here. It was a really interesting, I think, creative challenge to say, what does it look like, and answer those bigger thematic questions of what does it look like for this family when we've all witnessed how they survive when it's just this one contained space, but now we're opening up the world completely.
And the initial conversation was, that John was like, we made the first film, that's great, and I'm gonna, you guys figure out what you want to do with the second one. And then slowly I said to him, okay, we're gonna go out to some writers, we'll get some ideas. And I started bringing ideas to John to see what he thought of all these ideas. And nothing was really sparking, and he's like, I have an idea. And I said, well, okay, if you have an idea, why don't you think about it and get back to me. Next thing you know, he's like, I have an idea, it's pretty fleshed out. And I said to him, well, maybe you should write it. And then he started writing it. And next thing you know, he's like, maybe I'll direct it. And so here we are today. Well, it's like, there's a moment as a parent, there's a moment in your life when your children leave the nest and they go off to college, whatever that is. And this is the moment for this family where they have to leave the nest and go out and learn how to survive on their own. It's a little early, you have a 15-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy and a baby, but they have no choice. So, Lee has prepared them the best he can. The casting in the 2 movies is all John Krasinski. And for every single role, he called me and said, this is who I think is perfect for this character when he wrote them. And I got the call, he's like, Cillian Murphy's Emmett. Now, Cillian Murphy, we'd be so lucky to have him in this role, and John reached out to him, and like every other character, there was no casting on the movies. It was, I wrote this role, it's Cillian Murphy, he reached out to Cillian Murphy, and he is Emmett. I mean, and that's how it's happened for both films in every role. So it really, there was no conversations, and John's been dead on with everything. The first film was a very intimate story about a family living on a farm in this world, and you witness that, yes, there are creatures out there, but you really don't know what's going on around the world. So I think you automatically want to open it up a little bit more. And we knew we were going to take the family off the farm. So, yes, it was definitely a choice to show that this has happened all over the world. It was a phone call from John to Djimon, and Djimon loved the original film and wanted to be part of the franchise and what we were building out. And John pitched this idea of what his character means to this world. And Djimon jumped right on board. I mean, was on a plane 3 or 4 days later and was with us. And, it's again, you're sitting behind the monitors and you're watching, and it's just those moments where you can't believe you have someone like Djimon playing this role, and how lucky we are to have him. Well, the beauty of this world is nothing has changed. If you make noise, you probably will die. So you still have to sit in the movie theater as an audience member and watch them tiptoe through this entire world not making any sounds. And now we're throwing everything at you because they have left the safety of their home. They have left, as we say, the sand paths are the safety of their home. Everything was always okay as long as you didn't leave the sand paths. So they are now leaving the sand paths. So the terror is there, and it's amped up to level 10.
The simple answer to that is the way you approach the second film is you get everyone from the first film, because it worked, and John is a magnificent director, and he wrote the script, and how do you argue with Emily and the kids? And so I think once we had a notion of what the story would be with those same actors and the same core skeleton group, John initially decided he did not want to write and direct the movie. So we were taking writer meetings and we were struggling to find a great story, and John started hearing stories, and I think that he felt that what he was hearing was not good enough for what the first movie was. So he stepped up and said, I'm going to write it. And I think once he started to write it, he fell in love with what he was writing because it was fantastic. And here we are again, the band's back together. John brings an elegance and an intellectual component to the storytelling that we hadn't really had before. He, you know, the way that I feel about the characters when I see them on screen and the way the audience felt about the characters when they see them on screen is a certainly more elevated involvement than we've had before. So I think that John has many strengths. Obviously, working with his wife creates an incredible, wonderful, and safe environment on set, and I think that that transcends all the other actors, and everyone feels great for being here. But John is he's just an incredible quarterback. He has the capacity to, he wrote the script so he knows every scene and what's coming before and what's coming after, and he's challenging himself on a daily basis to come up with different shots or more elevated ways of telling the story. Emily's talent is undeniable, and she's done so many different things. I don't know that she's ever been in a straight-ahead horror/thriller movie. And what is amazing about her is she says so much without saying anything, and she can convey emotion so deeply that the audience doesn't need to hear her speak to understand what she's going through. So when we set off to make this movie, before we had cast it, you dream that you're working with Emily Blunt, but you don't think you're actually going to get her. So here we are with her, and that's, you know, as a producer, we're always going to the squeaky wheel. What's the problem? What's the next problem? The place where we have no problems on this movie is the writing, the directing, and the acting, and she leads that. So at the end of the first movie, sadly, we lose John, and Emily is left to fend for her family with her three children, because they just had a baby. And the house that they are staying in is not a safe place to be. They had just killed 3 of the aliens, and they have to move on. And the question is, how does a mother move on with an infant and 2 young children in a world where there is peril everywhere you look? And Emily has to defend her 3 kids and get them to a place that they hope is safer.